Somewhat a related story if you look at the big picture. A secret inauguration after a disputed election in Belarus, and a Russian opposition leader finally released from the hospital after being poisoned. We've been talking about the difference between democracy and autocracy this morning, and that conversation continues. Joining us now, we have U.S. national editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce, and former ambassador to Sweden under President Obama, Mark Brzezinski. He served on the National Security Council staff under President Clinton as director of Russia and Eurasian Affairs. Good to have you both.
Ed Luce, the struggle continues in Belarus. The New York Times yesterday posted an extraordinary mini documentary
on everyone should watch that.
The leader of this democratic challenge. But the people of Belarus are still resisting. The people of Belarus are still demanding their freedom.
They are, and it's been many, many weeks now. They've been receiving moral support from the Europeans, most of the Europeans, and from the State Department here, and from American groups, not from the American president. As you probably saw last week, Lukashenko, the president of Belarus who rigged the election, went to Moscow, met with Putin, and it was extraordinary to watch the body language. He sat there on the edge of his seat with a notebook on his knees, scribbling notes as Putin spoke. Putin was sort of leaning back like a mafia don, and basically giving instructions. And it's now clear that that meeting was for Lukashenko to secure Putin's green light for him to go ahead with this secret inauguration. This is a country where an election was rigged, where there was no possibility of peaceful transfer of power, and where the Belarusians who tried to vote against Lukashenko and are being brutally suppressed in demonstrating against this, essentially this coup, are not getting support from the American president, as in any other circumstance they would be expected to do. Who himself, of course, as you've been talking about quite rightly all morning, is casting doubt on whether he would accept a peaceful transfer of power. It's a very odd moment.
Ambassador Mark Brzezinski, what should the United States be doing right now to support the peaceful marchers, the demonstrators, in a way that Ronald Reagan and other American presidents supported peaceful demonstrators and those who resisted the Soviet Union behind the Iron Curtain? What can we do?
Joe, President Trump at the UN this week should have said 3 words: I support Svetlana. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya is the housewife in Belarus who, because her husband, the opposition leader, is in jail, is leading this national movement. And those 3 words would have empowered this opposition movement, which has united the country. Eastern Belarus, Western Belarus, Catholics, Russian Orthodox. It's a little bit like the Solidarity movement in Poland 40 years ago this year, which united the country to topple the Soviet regime there. The point is, to add to Ed's great commentary and description of the obsequiousness of Lukashenko visiting Russian President Putin this past week, the Belarusian people have been fighting for freedom for 26 years. This is the last dictator in Europe. And this is not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. This is low-hanging fruit in terms of U.S. leadership standing for our values. You talked, Joe, about President Reagan. What did President Bush Sr. do when the Soviet regime began to topple? He immediately had economic plans in place to help the newly freed Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, Lithuanians get back on their feet. There's nothing like this coming out of the U.S., and this is, to me, again, low-hanging fruit for American leadership.
Yeah. Hey, Ed, let's talk about Navalny. He is out of the hospital, but needs about a month to recuperate, but is talking about going back to Russia and continuing to demand democratic reforms there. Tell us what's the latest on him.
Well, it's quite clear that he was poisoned with Novichok, this Soviet devised poison that has been used on others, including many ex-Russian spies based in Britain. He is absolutely clearly a victim of a Russian plot. That this is not something you go and buy in your pharmacy. This is a very, very preserved Russian state chemical. Putin telephoned Macron, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, this week, and claimed to the president of France that Navalny had taken Novichok on his own to try and frame the Russian government. Now, Macron reportedly blew a gasket when Putin spoke to him. He said, "I'm not some Russian peasant that you can feed these kinds of stories to." Again, I think much like as Mark was elaborating on, much like last week's meeting between Lukashenko and Putin, this is Putin basically telling the world, in this case the French president, he can do what he likes. There is no consequence. The fact that Navalny is now talking about going back to Russia, he's really the sort of leading opposition figure to Putin. The previous one, Boris Nemtsov, was killed on Red Square. The fact that Navalny is saying he now wants to return to Russia is an extraordinary measure of the character of this man. Again, I think Mark was absolutely right. You have an American president getting behind somebody. The power of that is extraordinary. The power of the West putting its shoulder behind Navalny would be remarkable. And we all know who he is now. We all know, we have for many years, but we all know the measure of this man. He's an extraordinarily courageous figure.
Now, hey, Mark, let's talk finally about the United Nations, who is celebrating what the Washington Post described as a gloomy 75th anniversary. Has there ever been a time that the United Nations seemed less relevant to the affairs of the world, and what can be done to make that international organization vital in a way that its founders 75 years ago conceived it to be? Because this was, again, an institution that 75 years ago the world held out great hope for.
Clearly, Joe, the UN has not lived up to its expectations in terms of pulling together a collective response as the most effective response for global challenges, whether it's pandemics or international terrorism or many of the regional military challenges. But one thing the UN does have is this, Joe. It has the power to convene like few others. And that's why this week was in certain ways a missed opportunity for the United States in terms of the U.S. president to speak to the world. Because what the UN annual meeting provides is an opportunity for the U.S. to give a statement of vision, why the U.S. is important to the world and why the world needs America. And then the American president can point out what America expects from the world. Instead, we had President Trump talking about how our weapons are the most advanced, while President Xi of China talked about carbon neutrality for China by 2060, and that isolationism cannot return. Which message do you think is more attractive to the world? And who do you think the world wants to see succeed after these speeches? So in that sense, we're missing the utility of this flawed institution, but an institution that can be useful in terms of advancing the American interest.
All right, former Ambassador Mark Brzezinski and U.S. National Editor for the Financial Times, Ed Luce, thank you both very much for your input this morning. We have a lot more still to come on Morning Joe. Will Republican leaders speak out today against the president's refusal to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. There have only been a few so far, plus new reporting that the Trump campaign is discussing contingency plans to bypass election results as part of a bid to hold on to power. And Democratic Senator Cory Booker will be our guest. Morning Joe is coming right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.